Why didn't Russia use its best fighter jets, drones, or state of the art technology like S-400 or 500 in Ukraine, but allowed the Ukrainians to shoot down a number of its warplanes, helicopters, tanks, and kill so many soldiers? Is the Russian military as powerful as we think it to be? Okay, so first of all, you're saying that the Ukrainians have shot down a large number of warplanes and helicopters. They've destroyed lots of tanks and killed so many soldiers. So, on what basis have you reached this conclusion that so many casualties have happened among Russia's soldiers and so many tanks, planes, etc. have been destroyed? From where did you obtain this data? Is it the propaganda you have been seeing on Twitter, on the Western media, on YouTube, and on various Indian news channels? There are a couple of at least 2 3 news channels in India which are reporting from Ukraine. They are embedded within the Ukrainian forces more or less, and they are uh, the news that they are relaying to India represents the Western or NATO perspective of what's happening. And that, see, all sides indulge in propaganda. I am not making the claim that only one side is indulging in propaganda. But when it comes to the delivery mechanisms of information, only one side controls that. All of social media is based in the US. Whatever social media Indians consume is based in the US, right? All the media is based in the US. Even these Indian news agencies and media uh, channels, etc., they may have some kind of affiliation with the US in some form or the other, which may not be directly or indirectly visible. So, what we are seeing is nothing but Western propaganda. The Russians are trying to do their own propaganda, but it's not visible anymore because it's been cut off, right? So, in order to get a balanced perspective of what's happening, you have to look at both sides of propaganda, and then you can make your own deductions of what's really happening. Now, like I said the last time also, the best way to see what's really happening in Ukraine is to see a big picture perspective. See the maps. And if I don't have the maps today, last time I showed the maps, you could see clearly from day 1 to day 3 to day 5 to day 10, you could see the Russian control over Ukraine on the map, visibly represented on the map, increasing day by day. So you can see the Russians are doing very well when you look at the map. That's called a top down approach of looking at information and data. But if you look at a bottom up approach, if you look at this piece of information, that piece of news, and this piece of propaganda, that is a very haphazard way of looking at things, right? So, from what I have seen personally, right, and I have been keeping track of what's happening in Ukraine from day one and before day one. So, from what I have seen, there have been very few Russian casualties, soldiers, most likely less than 2,000. According to the media propaganda, like tens of thousands of Russians have died, which is absolute nonsense. Most likely, there have been less than 2,000 Russian soldiers who've died. In a war, people die, especially combatant soldiers. When it comes to warplanes, helicopters, tanks, I mean, I have seen a couple of images of 2, 3 tanks that have been destroyed in whatever reason, and we don't know whether it's a Ukrainian tank or a Russian tank. They all have the same equipment, by the way. When it comes to helicopters, etc., again, how do we know what helicopter it is? They all have the same equipment. What we do know is that within the first 2 to 3 hours, the Russians achieved complete air superiority over Ukraine, which means they took out all the Ukrainian air force and the radars and all the defense mechanisms. Right. So, in the light of that, you may have some sporadic incidents of some helicopter taken down or something, but it's not really happened on a large scale. So, it is being made to look like the Russians have suffered lots of casualties. The Russian advance has been bogged down. All the various so-called experts and think tank members, etc., all across Twitter and Facebook and everywhere, are pouring out this information that seems to indicate that the Russians have done a terrible miscalculation and they are faring terribly in the war. But if you look at the map of the advance day by day, you can see that the Russians are advancing steadily, right? It's not a lightning advance, it's not a blitzkrieg like we would imagine a blitzkrieg kind of advance to take 24 hours or 48 hours and take over the whole country. But blitzkrieg, the name blitzkrieg, comes from the German advance into France in the Second World War. And their advance, this lightning warfare advance, blitzkrieg advance, was slower than the current Russian advance into Ukraine. So let's put things into perspective, right? So the Russians are, I think, advancing steadily. They're doing reasonably well if you disregard the propaganda to the to the opposite effect. Now the question is, why didn't Russia use all the fighter jets and all those things which they do have, right? Because they don't want to destroy the country. If they had gone, if they had taken the approach that the Americans always take, whether it is Afghanistan, whether it is Iraq, whether it is Libya, or wherever, or Yemen, or the former Yugoslavia, the American approach is to go all out and flatten the country first. Nothing should live or breathe there, and then you walk in, and then you conquer the country. That's the American way. And it causes millions of casualties among civilians, as we know, right? I mean, the so-called war on terror has killed at least 6 million civilians, right? And when it comes to the invasion of Iraq that happened in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, that around that time, that killed at least 2 million civilians in Iraq. Do you Can you comprehend the number 2 million, right? The Russians don't want to do that. They have the firepower, the jets, the machinery, the armed capability, the army, the military capability to completely flatten the country of Ukraine in 24 to 48 hours. They have desisted from doing that. They could have done an all out attack, the what's known as the so-called shock and awe approach. Bring in all your heavy bombers, uh, shoot thousands of cruise missiles and other missiles, just flatten everything, and then walk in. We won. But that's not what they want to do, right? They want to take the country more or less intact. They just want to change the regime. They want to remove the puppet regime and install their own puppet regime. They want to remove the puppet regime that's been installed by the Americans, and they want to install a pro-Russia puppet regime. Right? So it's not about doing what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad. It's all about power. They want to regain control over the country. So that's what they're doing, and they don't want to destroy the country. The best way to take a country is to take it intact, right? So that's what they are trying to do, and that's why they have not used all the latest weapons, the best fighter jets, drones, and all those things. They don't want to do it. They don't want to destroy the country. It's not an enemy country. They don't see it as an enemy country. They see Ukraine as their own territory that has been taken away from them. So they want to take it back more or less intact, with as little damage as possible and as few civilian casualties as possible. That is what the approach seems to be, given the pattern we have observed over the past few days, ever since the uh, intervention in Ukraine began.